Rock the Vote is a local grassroots movement. It's based in this region here, and we, as a movement, have thought too much going wrong with Auckland. We're losing control of our city, so we want to take political action. We are not pretending that we're a political party that's playing in the election. We know we're a grassroots movement that's sick and tired of the people we support and vote for turning into traitors and treasonous people. So we decided to go the other way and work from the grassroots up. This whole top-down thing's over. But I'm not going to give a talk about that right now. There's a much more interesting speaker coming on after me. I'm handing things over now to the chairman of our Rock the Vote, Michael O'Mell. He will take things on and introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. I'm Michael from Rock the Vote, and I'll be introducing our guest speaker, Trevor Loudon, in a second. But I just thought I'd just give you a quick overview of how this event transpired. And a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to Trevor being interviewed by Rodney Hyde on Reality Check Radio, and I just thought, awesome, wow, amazing. So I thought people need to hear this interview, so what I did was I emailed the interview to the members of our Rock the Vote group. Later that night we had our weekly meeting, and we discussed it, said let's invite Trevor to come and talk to us. So I emailed Trevor just directly and said, I'm Michael from a grassroots movement called Rock the Vote. We listened to your interview, I loved it. This is a long shot, will you come and talk to us? A couple of hours later, Trevor said, yep, no problem, I'd love to do it. So since then, for the last 2 weeks, Rock the Vote have been full on busy organising this event, and that's how we got here today. So I would like to invite Trevor up and to do your thing. And what Trevor's done, he actually promised me he's going to go with both barrels today and say, go for it. But just one thing I just ask you if you could cover is just with all your knowledge and experience about what's been happening and is happening politically, both in a Western and global context. But more specifically from a New Zealand context, when we consider, in mind the election later on this year, because I'm pretty sure that everyone in this room is deeply worried about what's happening to our country, is deeply concerned, and I'm also pretty confident that everyone in this room deeply cares about our country and loves New Zealand. So I just, if you can see that. And at the end of the Trevor's speech, we'll be having a 15-minute perhaps Q&A.
Well, thanks very much. There's a great turnout. Very, very impressive, I've got to say. I want to thank Michael for organising Chris and all the team at such short notice. And the one thing is really, I want to thank the person I think is most responsible for this meeting, and that's Jacinda Ardern. Okay. Thought you might agree with me. I'm originally from Christchurch. I've spent the last few years in the United States. I'm married to my American wife, Victoria. She studied at Otago University, so she has a deep love for this country. And it's really amazing what you guys are doing here is followed in the United States. American grassroots people they follow New Zealand. They saw what Jacinda was doing. They saw the March on Parliament. They saw what happened with Posey Parker. They are very interested in what happens here. Most Americans know something about New Zealand, except for one I met in Los Angeles. I love street food. I walked up to a vendor, got some food. He gave me the money, and he said, "You have an accent. Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from New Zealand." He said, "Well, where's that?" So to make it really, really simple for him, I said, "Look, it's down in the South Pacific near Australia." He said, "where Arnold Schwarzenegger comes from." So you can see why they vote like they do in California. Right. So I want to give an overview today from someone who spends a lot. I've probably done 1,000 speeches in the States now. I've been to 48 states. I've been all over the place. And I know a lot of the people that you would follow on, blog, on podcasts and TV shows and that kind of thing. And I want to give a bit of perspective on what is happening in the world, the United States, and lastly, New Zealand. Because the patterns are similar everywhere you go. Now, what we're seeing is this. Okay, we'll go back. May 2019, President Trump put tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the country. And the Xinhua news agency, the Chinese Communist Party publication, said our response to America's aggression is to declare people's war on the United States. And people are going, well, what does people's war mean? Are they going to put tariffs on American goods? People's war is a term from Mao Zedong. It means to destroy your enemy through unconventional methods before your soldiers even march. It is the flood of fentanyl and pee that we're seeing in the Western world. That's completely a Chinese people's war operation. It is the takeover of Facebook and TikTok, the influence in sport that's coming through Nike and companies like that. It is the co-option of big tech. It is Black Lives Matter in the United States, completely a Chinese communist operation. It is stealing elections. It's controlling Hollywood. It's allowing Chinese to buy up farmland and businesses in Western countries. All of this, it's co-option of politicians. All of this is people's war. Now you imagine if you were Xi Jinping and you wanted to destroy America, which he does. And you were thinking, well, I've got a few options here. I could do a big trade war with the United States, billions of dollars, and I might lose. I could have a big shooting war, a big $1 trillion shooting war with the United States, but that's a little bit iffy. Or I could spend a couple of $1 billion buying American, British, Australian, and New Zealand politicians to do my dirty work for them. What would you do if you were Xi Jinping? What's the cheapest and most effective option?
Psychological warfare.
It's psychological warfare. That's a huge part of it. We're under attack from every single direction. People say there's no communism in America, Trevor. There's no communism in New Zealand. It's like a fish saying there's no water in the sea. We are swimming in it, but we don't recognise it. And I want to explain some of its facets as we go forward. In Canada, the Canadian Intelligence Service put out a briefing 10 years ago that the Chinese Communist Party controlled the governments of Alberta and British Columbia 10 years ago. There was just big scandals in Canada about the Chinese influence in their elections. Trump's intelligence advisor Ratcliffe said 3 years ago, the Chinese control so many American politicians now, and both sides of the House, they can determine which legislation passes the Congress and which doesn't. And do you think the situation's any different here, people? You got Maisie Chen right here in Auckland, who's deeply an agent of Communist China. Very much so. But remember when the National Party had a Chinese member of parliament a few years ago. Born in China, he would go accompany John Key on many trips to Communist China to do trade deals. It was revealed he'd been a teacher at the Chinese Communist Party's spy school. And Bill English said, oh, that's all right, it's just like he was in the SIS or something. What they do is they get the left through ideology. I'll explain later, a lot of our New Zealand politicians on the left are Maoists. That's what they are. and then they get the right through money. You know, I had my lawyer in Christchurch. I spoke to him recently, and he said, Trevor, that Chinese Communist Party, this is a conservative guy. I wouldn't have a liberal lawyer, I'll tell you. But anyway, he said, look, the Chinese Communist Party really knows how to look after you. They just took me for a week's tour on the Yangtze River. I met all these CCP officials, all these top people. They wined me and dined me. They treated me so wonderfully. Well, this is how we get co-opted. The conservatives, they put on the boards of Chinese companies. They funnel the money. The left, it's money and ideology. Many of our left-wing politicians have always been pro-China. That's what they grew up. That's what they started their university careers in. But anyway, going back to the People's War. People's War is also obviously biological. You know, if you can destroy an enemy country with a disease, that's a lot cheaper than an army, is it not? Now, I cannot prove that the Chinese deliberately released the COVID to hurt President Trump or wreck the US economy at the time they did. I think it's only about 99.99998% certain at this stage. But we know 100% sure that when the disease was out there, the Chinese clamped down travel in their own country and they encouraged travel to the Western countries. They even had a big military games with soldiers from all over the world in Beijing. They didn't cancel it. They allowed it to go forward. So these people came and competed and went back to Canada, the United States, whatever, and COVID was everywhere. Wuhan, sorry, you're right. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of bad things come out of Wuhan, sir. I'll explain that later. So what happened? We get the pandemic. It's coming everywhere, and President Trump's up for election, and he's a shoo-in. Everybody knows he's going to get re-elected. Economy's doing good. He's keeping China in its box. The bad guys of the world are sort of, are backing off. Everything's going good. But the Chinese know that Trump is working with Japan and Australia and India and Taiwan to freeze out the Communist Party of China, to basically shut them down, to do to the Communist Party of China what Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And they knew he could do that. And you imagine the boon to the world that would have been. The energy and the entrepreneurship and the culture of China serving good rather than evil. You imagine the boon to the world that would have been. They knew, the Chinese Communist Party knew it was either Trump or them. And they were going to make darn sure it was not going to be them. So they unleashed the COVID on the planet, especially on the United States. And President Trump, facing election, is told by Mr. Fauci and by the World Health Organization that if he doesn't shut things down, there's going to be 2 million dead before Christmas. And what politician wants to get blamed for every dead grandmother in the country in election year? Because that's what he knew was going to happen. So he got sucked in to following the advice, shutting it down. He didn't understand what he was getting into. He didn't understand the trap that he was being led into. Now, we all know that Mr. Fauci has deep ties to China, but the head of the World Health Organization, Mr. Tedros, is a former leader of Ethiopia's pro-Chinese Communist Party. Big part of the Belt and Road was put in place by the Chinese. He's not even a medical doctor. He's an academic, a revolutionary, a student Maoist. He is China's man at the head of the World Health Organization. Now, we know that most countries in the world have signed up to an initiative. Next time we have a pandemic, the World Health Organization gets to dictate everything we do. Have you heard about this? Yeah. Everything. Vaccines, lockdown policies, travel, economic policies, you name it. The World Health Organization, come the next pandemic, will be a de facto world government. Now, the World Health Organization has a compliance unit, a behavioural modification and compliance unit. That means, how do we get them to do what we want? They use psychology to enforce their policies. It won't be just psychology, but the head of this unit is a woman called Susan Mickey, just appointed about a year ago. Now, Susan Mickey used to advise Boris Johnson on his health lockdowns. She was known as the mask Nazi. She said we would probably have to wear masks for the rest of our lives. She was full-on lockdowns, the most stringent lockdown advocate you could possibly imagine. But guess what? Susan Mickey is also a leading member of the Communist Party of Britain. She is communist royalty. She was not just a communist, she was a Stalinist. They used to call her Stalin's nanny in the Communist Party. She was a tanky. She still is a communist. She was a tanky, meaning the section of the communists who supported the tanks that suppressed the Prague Spring in 1968 in Czechoslovakia. You're a tanky, they will say, meaning you're a hard-line Stalinist. You're not just an ordinary communist. You are the hardest of the hardcore. And this is Susan Mickey. She pushed with the British labour unions, which are completely controlled by the Communist Party of Britain. She pushed the harshest possible lockdowns she could. She was part of the Zero COVID group that was set up by the British communist newspaper Morning Star, completely all pro-China. She is openly pro-CCP. She praises the Chinese response to COVID over anyone else. She's actually worked in China doing smoking cessation programs. She is the behavioural modification expert. And now she will be, in the next pandemic, the most powerful woman on the planet. Because Tedros will be enforcing the lockdowns and she'll be telling him how to do it. So we are being set up for something way beyond what we saw under COVID, folks. Way beyond. Now there's a Maoist concept, comes from Mao Zedong, called the mass line. Now, so the communists, this is what they do. The Maoists decide on the mass line. This is our line. This is what must happen. What everybody in our network must say. No deviation. The mass line. So it comes from the top and everybody must echo this line. Now, the Chinese Communist Party put out a memorandum, a letter just at the start of the COVID, with 3 or 4 points to 230 world communist parties. First point, don't blame China for the pandemic. China is leading the charge. China is helping more than anybody. It's all America's fault. And the Chinese communist health system is the best in the world. These were mass line points. And it's got to be stringent lockdowns, massive mask wearings, and vaccinations. So what happened when the COVID struck? Did we have a free and open debate about vitamin therapies and hydroxychloroquine and all of these other alternatives? Or was there a mass line? There was a complete mass line approach. You must do lockdowns. You must do vaccinations. You must basically listen to the government. As Jacinda famously said, the government is your only source of truth. This is Maoist mass line. That's exactly what it is. And you will find all of the countries and all of the states around the world, like in America, the worst lockdowns were in California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Illinois, Michigan, Massachusetts, New York, all the states with the strongest communist Chinese influence. So the Chinese used their politicians, subservient politicians, and they used the labour unions, which they control all around the world, to enforce the lockdowns as long and hard as they could to inflict maximum economic damage on our countries. It was never to do with public health. It was always about control and enforcing mass line politics on the whole world, setting us up for the next big one, which will be way worse than the last one. So we got the mass line. You look in Victoria, Australia. Where were the worst lockdowns in Australia? Melbourne, Victoria. Because their premier has been to China 6 times. Their premier brought the Chinese Belt and Road into Victoria against the wishes of his own government. You know, they were the worst because he isn't completely in bed with communist China. You'll find this pattern repeated all over the world. Which country in Europe has the least Chinese influence? It's Sweden. Which country in Europe had the lightest lockdown policies? Sweden.
The Dirty Institute in Melbourne had the first COVID case from Wuhan.
Oh, the Yuche Institute, the North Korean people, yeah. Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me. But you look at Italy, you know, they got a lot of Chinese influence there. They got the COVID first, and they had the harshest lockdowns. So then the United States, we had the COVID, and we were in Florida, right? So we had the best. Florida's got Ron DeSantis. Who's heard of Ron DeSantis? Okay. Yeah, he's a great governor. And I'll say some nice, but I'm a little biased towards Ron, because I'll tell you why, because there's a connection between me and Ron, you see. Because, see, Ron's family comes from Philadelphia, and my wife Victoria's family comes from Philadelphia. And 40 years ago, my wife's aunt dated Ron DeSantis' father's cousin. Okay? Okay? So we're practically family. All right? Just so you know. Just so you're aware. But anyway, so what do we get? We got the Black Lives Matter rioting, right? So, because George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, right? No, it's complete garbage. All of that rioting was caused by 2 pro-Chinese communist parties, the Freedom Road Socialist Organisation and Liberation Road. They used to be the same organisation, but they split. But Freedom Road Socialist Organisation are street-level Maoists. Pro-China, 100%, in the streets, battling the cops. They burnt the they set off firebombs at the Republican Party convention in Minneapolis a few years ago. And the day that Trump was inaugurated, February 20th, 2017, Steph Urick, the head of Freedom Road, publicly declared their job was to bring down the president by making the country ungovernable. So in 2019, Freedom Road Socialist Organisation set up a front group, a national front group called the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And it was all about finding incidences of police brutality against Black and Latino Americans. Because every year about 1,100 Americans get killed by the police. 99% of them in completely justifiable circumstances. But they know there's always going to be a controversial case that they can use to create trouble. So they tried to start the rioting when a black jogger was killed in Atlanta, but that didn't work. They tried it again when a woman called Breonna Taylor, a young black woman, was killed in Louisville, Kentucky. That didn't work. It worked with George Floyd because it was so darn public, though they didn't mention the fact that he was full of fentanyl at the time that he died. And it was right in the headquarters of the Freedom Road Socialist Organisation. I have on tape Jess Sundin, the wife of Steph Urick, boasting about how she started the riots in Minneapolis, how that the joy they felt when Precinct 3, the police station, was burnt to the ground, and that the arson and the anarchy and the looting and the violence was an integral part of their movement. Within 2 days, they were burning cities all over America. Just spontaneous, right? They had it all ready. They had the bricks ready to deliver. They had the fire bombs made. It was already waiting for the spark. And George Floyd was the spark. But if it hadn't been George Floyd, it would have been Fred Smith in Tucson the week after, or Joe Jones in Seattle the week after that. They were going to do it. It was election year, and they were determined. And so Freedom Road Socialist Organisation, they burnt Minneapolis, Kenosha, Wisconsin, they burnt Chicago, they burnt Tallahassee, Orlando, Miami, and St. Pete, and Tampa in Florida, Houston and Dallas. They burnt Salt Lake City, they burnt Tucson, Arizona, San Jose, and East LA. The rest of it was done by the other pro-Chinese Communist Party, Liberation Road. They have a front group that some of you may have heard of. It's called Black Lives Matter. Completely a Chinese operation, folks. Black Lives Matter, the head of it, the woman who started it, Alicia Garza, is a Marxist, member of Left Roots, a Maoist organisation affiliated with Liberation Road, best friends with Alex Tom of the Chinese Progressive Association of San Francisco. That's a big community organisation, voter registration group that basically runs San Francisco on behalf of Communist China. Alex Tom his group wrote the manual for Black Lives Matter. They organised Black Lives Matter. They helped Black Lives Matter set up networks all over the states. They funded Black Lives Matter. And Alex Tom, I have on tape, boasting about his deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party, his absolute hatred for President Trump, defending China by getting rid of Trump, and how he runs his messaging past the Chinese consulate before he does anything. It was a Chinese operation. So what do when you've got all this energy out there? You've got all these young black and Latino kids who think Trump's a Nazi, Republicans are racist, the whole country's against them. You use that, you utilise that energy for the upcoming election. Has anybody seen 2,000 Mules by Catherine Engelbrecht? Okay. Well, I was at the pit where they released a lot of their information. I spoke there. But what Catherine Engelbrecht discovered was the election was decided in 7 key states: Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and one other. Just can't quite remember. And what the Chinese Progressive Association did was they set up voter registration organisations in all of the inner cities of all of these key states, and they used Black Lives Matter activists to sign up black and Latino voters and stuff ballots. Catherine Engelbrecht discovered these organisations by analysing phone data. She analysed phone data, computerised phone data, and saw patterns of people going to ballot boxes, then going back to the headquarters of certain organisations. I discovered these organisations from the other end, working with the Chinese communist networks and who they were working with. But it overlapped. The Chinese were on the ground stuffing ballots in key states. In Arizona, Lucha, they made 8 million phone calls and knocked on 1 million doors. In Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they claim they won the state for Biden-Harris. They all claim they were the key determinant in the election. Yes, there was fraud on every level, but right under our noses, Chinese voter registration groups were working the inner cities, using Black Lives Matter activists to do the dirty work for them. All Chinese. Now, here's an example. Go back to Wuhan. Virginia in the east coast of America always was a very strongly conservative Republican state. It was as red could be. And then it went bluer and bluer and bluer. In 2018, it went completely blue. And a group there called New Virginia Majority, a voter registration group, put an op-ed in the New York Times claiming credit for flipping the state. And it was true. They started in 2005. They were a front group for Liberation Road. They went out and signed up 300,000 minority voters in Northern Virginia. Then they worked with the Democrat governor to legalize, to give voting rights back to 200,000 Virginia felons. You can't vote in many states in America if you have a felony conviction. But he wrote 200,000 personal pardons for 200,000 felons to get around the Virginia Constitution. And anyway, so that 500,000 voting block is what shifted Virginia into the Democrat column. Well, it turns out the reason they were so successful was they were using GIS computerized maps. They had every single electorate precinct in Virginia mapped. They could tell you where the Vietnamese lived. They could tell you where the Laotians lived, and the Filipinos, and the Iranians. And so they could send the right volunteers into the right neighborhoods to maximize their vote. Well, those maps were generated for 10 years by a Liberation Road communist called Steve McClure, a graduate of the George Mason University Geography Department, who's been making those maps for the last 10 years, working out of the Geography Department of Wuhan University, China. So you don't tell me that the Chinese aren't interfering in your elections. They are using their communist Chinese population here to infiltrate the local political parties, to get the students that they have at the university to vote illegally when necessary. That's what they're doing in Canada. They've got all these Chinese students studying there. They go to them and say, you got to get out and vote, legally or not, or we're going to revoke your student visa. This is what they do, people. Right under your noses, right now. They're working here. So let's talk about New Zealand a little bit. Now, New Zealand, this is how it works in the Labour Party in New Zealand. And I'm sure there's a lot of Labour supporters or ex-Labour supporters here. There's no angels in New Zealand politics, folks. Not in the current leadership. You know, and I'm not talking about the party of Norman Kirk. I'm talking about something else. Norman Kirk used to be the mayor of my town, Kaiapoi, New Zealand. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the modern thing. The Democratic Party in America now is communist. The Canadian Liberal Party is communist. Simple. These are the people who marched for the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. They supported the Nicaraguan Sandinistas. They supported Fidel Castro. And now they're in power. They run big tech. They run the government. They run the unions. And they want their revolution before they die. Something they've worked for all their life. And that's the same in New Zealand. This is how it works in New Zealand. Since the 60s, New Zealand student politics, off and on, has been controlled by pro-Chinese Maoists. So you go to Auckland University, you get involved with Radical Society, Progressive Club, they get you elected to the ORSA executive, you use that as a political training ground, the Auckland University Students Association executive, or the Victoria University Students executive. You get yourself trained in politics. You're a Maoist. You take trips to Burma. You take trips to Cuba. You're a good professional communist. Then you go and work for Helen Clark, or you go and work for Steve Mahari or someone else, and then you stand for Parliament. That is the road to control of New Zealand. It comes through student politics. Is anybody here was at Auckland in the mid-90s, for instance? One or two? Anybody remember Brendan Lane, who was the ORSA president, 1995-96? Maoist, 100% radical society. Guess who was the campaign manager for Jacinda Ardern when she got elected in Mount Albert? Brendan Lane, the Maoist. Guess who Sarah Helm used to work very closely with Brendan Lane? She now runs a drug policy foundation. But she was, for a few months, working out of the Prime Minister's office on the COVID response communication strategy. Maoist, Auckland University Maoist, working in the Prime Minister's Department, another Maoist got Jacinda elected. There's many examples of this. I'll give you more. Phil Twyford, the man who was in charge of the roading and the the roading infrastructure, who does such a great job. I know that Auckland is known all over the country for the great roading infrastructure you have here and the ease of travelling around Auckland. Well, Phil Twyford was actively involved with the Workers' Communist League. He was actively involved with the Radical Society at Auckland University. Now he's a Member of Parliament. And the left hates cars. They hate roads. They hate mobility. They just want you all live in little cities, the 15-minute cities, where you get up in the morning and you have a breakfast of mung beans and you get on your bike and you ride down to the co-op. That's their ideal lifestyle for you folks. So what do you think they're going to do with your roading infrastructure? That's Phil Twyford. Now, we've seen the communists, the Maoists, have another thing. They call it the nationalities question. Now, this was brought up by Stalin in the early 20s because the original communists, it was all about the working class will rise up and take the wealth of the capitalists. But when Mao and Stalin come along, they were working often in undeveloped countries where there was no industrial working class. So how else do you foster hatred and division and bring about a revolution? Maybe you might try racial politics. So what they come up with, the idea of a nationalities question, you find a minority group. You agitate for independence for that minority group. You say they're oppressed. You say that they suffer from racism and they must be given affirmative action. They must be given places on boards. They must be given control. So instead of using the working class to take power over the existing structure, they use the minority race. They do this in America with the black people and the Native Americans. They do it in Norway with the Samic people. They do it in Ireland with the Catholics versus the Protestants. They do it in Chile with the Mapuche Indians. And they do it in Australia with the Aboriginals. And they absolutely do it here with the Maori population. I've seen documents from 1930 from the Soviet Union telling the New Zealand Communist Party to start agitating for a separate Maori homeland in New Zealand. Back in the 1936, people. We saw Ngā Tamatoa, we saw Bastion Point in the 70s, completely a communist operation. We saw Ngā Tamatoa, the sort of Maori Black Panther Party of the 70s. One of the famous Ngā Tamatoa couple, and they had a daughter, I think her name is Marama Davidson. Okay? The one who says that white men are the source of all violence. Because she is a bloody Maoist, people. She was brought up in a revolutionary family. And you see the hatred in her eyes, the arrogance, when she says, white men are the big problem. Because this is Maoist race politics. Now, you see what's happening in the local boards now. Maori have to have representation, 50% Maori representation. Well, okay, anybody in this room have kids? Anybody got children or grandchildren? Most of you? Okay, what happens in your family? Say you got 2 kids and you treat one really leniently and give them lots of pocket money and lots of praise, and you treat the other one really bad and make them work like dogs and give them no pocket money. What's your family going to look like after a few years of that? It's going to be absolute crap, right? It's going to be a disaster. Every parent knows you need the wisdom of Solomon to treat your children exactly by the same standard. That's the only way to harmony. If you treat your kids differently, you get disharmony, discord, your family falls apart. Any argument with this? So what happens in a country where you treat one race differently and by different standards than another? You get division, you get resentment, you get hatred, you get revolution. What we are seeing now is revolution. We are in a revolution. The idea is to use the Maori population to totally change the existing power structure of New Zealand. And this is not an anti-Maori thing. This is just stating the fact, wherever you see a minority, the communists will stoke grievances. They will exaggerate grievances. If there's no grievances, they'll make up grievances. They'll say the cops are persecuting these people. Well, look, they're in prison so much more than everybody else. Therefore, the Justice Department is obviously racist. This is all Maoist, national question politics. Now, who is your current Minister of Justice? No, Kiritapu Allen, Kiri Allen. Okay, just changed. Well, remember the Uruwera 17 of a few years ago when a bunch of radicals got caught training with guns up in the Uruwera Mountains. Tama Iti was leading it. Tama Iti, who went to China in 1973, who was a card-carrying member of the New Zealand Communist Party for many years, was leading these people. And see what they were doing. These were white anarchists and Maori supporters of the Cuban-backed Zapatista rebels in Mexico. That's who they were. They had deep relations with the Mexicans, with the Cubans. Tama Iti's very close to the Cuban embassy in this country. And they were stirring up, they were getting ready for a mini revolution. They were going to start violence, and then they were going to ask the UN to step in to stop to sort things out, because obviously New Zealand was a racist society. This is what they were going to do, but they got caught. Well, they had a group called Conscious Collaborations, and several members of the Uruwera 17 were in this Conscious Collaborations group. Guess who led Conscious Collaborations? That was Kiritapu Allen, Kiri Allen. And then she led it with a man called Tiano Tuiono, the Green Party Member of Parliament, who went to Cuba in 1997, who was a self-confessed communist. So she is a race. She complained about she was under surveillance by the Security Intelligence Service for several years. I am not surprised. She deserved it. But she's now your Minister of Justice. So how do you think she's going to administer the racial politics in your country? She is going to stir it up and stir it up and stir it up to the point where this country collapses, because she is a revolutionary. And she's your Minister of Justice. Now, we talked about Posey Parker the other week. Some of you are probably there. Okay? The most shocking thing, and the LGBTQ movement is completely communist, by the way. You know, it was started by Harry Hay, the American communist, back in the 1950s. Every major gay radical organisation in New Zealand, Australia, is run by communists of some stripe or another. It's not about the rights of gays. It's about using the homosexual movement to destroy family structures. That's what it's about. Break down the family. Second point on the Communist Manifesto, I believe. Though I may be corrected on that. But okay, but the worst thing that I saw in that whole debacle was the fact the New Zealand police did bugger all. Until the very last moment. They let it happen. So the big debate was, shall we let her in? No, well, it'll look bad if we don't. We'll let her in, but no protection. We'll just let the mob go loose. We'll let the mob shout her down, threaten her, assault her. We'll teach her a lesson. So nobody else dares to do what she did. That was the message. Well, who is the new Minister of Police in this country, folks? Ginny Anderson. Does anybody remember Ginny's granddad? Bill Anderson. The most famous communist in New Zealand. The man who went to the Soviet Union multiple times. A complete, loyal patriot of the Soviet Union. I'll tell you a little story about this. Just illustrates, or I'll tell you two stories. Bill Anderson, Ken Douglas, right? The two big communists for many years in this country. Socialist Unity Party. Here's two stories. I had a friend who was in the SUP, and he went to Moscow to train on racial politics, stirring up politics here, union control, etc. They controlled the Labour government for many years, out of Moscow. But what he said, this is what happened one night. He went out on the booze with Bill Anderson, because Bill Anderson was a big boozer. And this was in October 1983. And this was the winter time in Moscow. And they were drunk. Bill Anderson was paralytic. And he lost his shoes. Don't know how, but he lost his shoes. And they had to, my friend was thinking, I've got to get him back. I've got to get him back to the where we're staying. He'll freeze to death. He'll get frostbite. So they went to go on the train, the metro, Moscow metro, and he dragged Bill onto the metro. And there's a little conductor about 4 foot tall and about 4 foot wide, and she blew a whistle. Niet, you can't come on. You can't come on when you're drunk. You cannot ride the metro when you're drunk. So he said, what am I going to do? And here's an idea. Blah, blah, blah. Comunista Nova Zelandia pulls out his party card. And the woman sees this, and she took everybody off the train so they could ride back to where they wanted to go. Everybody had to freeze in the Moscow winter. Here's a story about Ken Douglas, the champion of the worker, right? Who all Helen Clark just loved. Champion of the worker. Okay, so my friend, when he was in Moscow, they had a big tour of the Moskvich car factory. That's where they made what you call Ladas here, but they were Fiat 125s or something. Massive factory, totally robotised, beautiful factory built by the Italians. So they got a tour around the thing. You know, this delegation of communists got a tour. But you weren't allowed to go to the restroom. That was the rule, you can't go to the toilet. But my friend was a bit of a rebel and he had to go, so he snuck away and he found a room that he thought looked like a toilet. So he opened the door, walked in, and he looked, and it was like a big concrete space, big massive space, no cubicles, just pipes sticking up out of the ground and a hose. So you got to squat over the pipe, then you wash it down with the hose. And he's thinking, what? And he was shocked. He went back to the tour guide and he said, look, he says, I just went to your toilets. He says, I'm shocked. What about the dignity of the worker? And the guy said, look, you don't understand. You don't understand. He says, we can't trust the worker. If we have cubicles there, they might take a break off work and have a cigarette while I'm supposed to be working. They might read a paper while I'm supposed to be working. They might even commit a homosexual act. So he thought, wow. So he went back to New Zealand and he knew Ken Douglas very, very well. And he related this story to Ken Douglas, the champion of the worker, right? And he told him all what happened, and Ken says, don't you get it, Frank? Don't you get it? He says, what do you mean? He says, if we ever get power in New Zealand, we're going to treat the bastards just the same. So you've got to understand the left, people. The communists are not about sharing the wealth. They're about concentrating all wealth and all power in very, very few hands. Now let's get to Chippy, shall we? Chippy. Well, one of Chippy's first acts at Victoria University in 1997 was to get arrested with 70 Trotskyists and Marxists at a big protest in Wellington. Then he gets on the student executive and he's surrounded by radical society. The whole executive was Maoists. He was on the executive for 4 years with all of these Maoists. And so he works with them, he deals with them, and guess what? He continues to support them to this day. He works with Living Wage Aotearoa, which was set up by Leonie Morris of the Workers' Communist League. He is very close to Alistair Shaw, the leader of Radical Society, a leader of the New Zealand-China Friendship Society. He has held two major, in the last year and a half, when he was Minister of Education, he held two major webinars with the Education Department of not Australia, but of China. He is deeply in bed with China. Deeply. And he has a whole Maoist pedigree going back to 1997. He's worked with these people the whole way through. You got virtually, Graham Robertson also came out of this Maoist student movement. If I said Phil Twyford, Aisha Verrill of your health minister, who is going to deal with the next pandemic, also came out of the very radical student movement at Otago University. She worked with Chippy, she worked with Graham Robertson in student politics. So you've got this Maoist mafia now basically running the New Zealand Labour Party and to a large degree the Green Party. So you're being set up, people, when the next pandemic comes along, to lockdowns and restrictions like you've never seen. You're going to see, Chippy's backed off the race policies a little bit. Three Waters is changed. No, it's not. It's the same as it ever was. And if he gets elected in this election, he's going to be just as bad as Jacinda, if not worse. Because he's smarter than Jacinda and not as condescending as Jacinda. But he's just as Marxist as Jacinda. Jacinda, does anybody see the little video I did about 20 minutes long of Jacinda Ardern working with the International Union of Socialist Youth? And, she went to China, she went to all these countries. Comrade, 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 comrade. They are Marxist people. This is not the Labour Party. This is not the Labour Party of Norman Kirk. At all. Not at all.
Chippy and Ardern travelled to London together.
Yes, they did in 2007. They were in London together. She was involved with communist groups in America, went to London. Her and Chippy worked out, met up over there. Absolutely did. But what I'm getting at here, we are in a mass line worldwide revolution, and the pandemic was driven by the Chinese. And we saw it playing out in New Zealand because our leading politicians are pro-China or working with the Maoists or just basically communists or too dumb to know any better. Now, National fell in line, ACT fell in line, but it was driven by Labour. So this is what I say here. We're faced with an election coming up. The very first priority, the first thing you do when you're drowning is you pull the damn plug out of the bath, right? You turn off the tap. You stop the bleeding. We have to get rid of this government. That has to be the top priority because they are communists now. That doesn't mean I love National. That doesn't mean I trust any of the other politicians. But we have a communist government now that's going to wreck this country if we allow it to go forward. The very best outcome, I think, in this election would be Labour and the Greens defeated and a National ACT and something else coalition. All the little parties we've got, Democracy New Zealand, Conservatives, or, all the groups that you guys are supporting, if we could get 4 or 5 members of Parliament in there, we could basically squeeze them. That's what we've got to be aiming for, to get that balance of power. You saw what happened in America recently where 20 Republicans basically told Kevin McCarthy, if you don't give us this, and this, you will never be Speaker of the House. And they had the leverage to do that. That is the leverage we need in this country. People who believe as we are pretty much a majority in this country, but we know that most of the work's going to be done by 2 or 3%. So we've got to be able to leverage what we have to get 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, 7 or 8% in Parliament, that we are the balance of power and we can tell the National Party and ACT to do this, 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 this and this. End of 3 waters. End of all race-based policies. End of the emergency powers that came through the COVID. End of no more New Zealand contributions to the World Health Organisation. All of these things, we all know what we need. We have to get ourselves in a position where we have the leverage to get it. We can see there are people waking up. Sometimes you have to almost lose something before you really appreciate it. And I think that's where a lot of New Zealanders are now. You know, people have been warning we're going to lose our freedom, we'll lose our freedom, but it was pretty hard to take seriously when the beaches are good and you're making a bit of money and you're living in a beautiful country like this. It's pretty hard to understand that. While people are seeing it now, they are shocked at what our government could do to our people. They've finally seen evil in their face. And so we have enough people now that we can actually make a concrete difference. So I'm not about just influencing the culture. I'm about that. I'm not just about making a noise or doing a protest. I'm about actual real change. Really winning the battle against evil. And I believe we are in a battle between good and evil right now. Does anybody think I'm a little over the top on that one? You know, I think we definitely are. We see that now. We are in a battle between good and evil, and we've got to stand up. And see, this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because, you want to go to the parties. You want to be friends with everybody. You don't want to be hating your relatives or having them hate you. But this is the time to make a stand, folks. We're in a grievous situation, and the only thing that's going to get us out of it is truth. It's truth. Telling the darn truth, regardless of the consequences. We've tried everything else. Let's tell the truth. Unvarnished. And how do you tell the truth? Well, that takes a little courage, does it not? It takes courage to tell the truth. And I'm not trying to force any particular spiritual beliefs on anybody, but I'll say this. If you have a spiritual foundation in your life, you have some faith in your life, it's a lot easier to have courage. It's a lot easier to stand up because you can see the bigger picture. I heard a story the other day about a landing craft at D-Day, an American landing craft, and all these 18-year-old boys just terrified, about to charge the German machine guns. And the sergeant said to them, there are 2 kinds of people on this beach, the dead and those about to die. Let's go. And they went. How do you do that without a lot of faith and a lot of courage? How do you do that? So this is what I say to all of you. I am so gratified to see what I see here in my home country. We had a great meeting in Wellington the other night. I've got a great meeting, big meeting in Christchurch. And next day, I'm seeing people waking up and fired up like they've never been. That march that you did, and the occupation of the grounds at Parliament, that went all over the world, folks. That went everywhere. You got inspired by the Canadian truckers, well, they get inspired by you. We see the Dutch farmers. We see all these things happening because people are standing up in truth and courage and faith. Even if it's just faith in your country, faith in your fellow man. It's faith in something bigger than yourself. You're part of something. And this is what I see happening here now. And this is, we think, what we're doing is difficult. Because we're bucking the trends. We've got a lot of media against us. We've got a lot of people who want to laugh at us and, try and shut us down. And, a lot of people have been persecuted, etc. But what we're doing, is it as hard as what your fathers and grandfathers did when they charged German machine guns at Normandy? Is it as hard as what they did when they were trekking across North Africa facing down Rommel? Or, going up through Italy facing the Germans and Italians? Is it as hard as charging the beaches at Gallipoli? Everybody here virtually has got uncles or grandfathers who fought for New Zealand at some stage. Or the women who stayed behind and supported them and wrote them letters and baked stuff for them and organised stuff here and grieved when they didn't come back. Everybody's got that story in their background. Do we owe it to them? Do we owe it to them to save this wonderful country, or do we not? Is that our duty? Getting to that? And most of us here would have children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews or cousins. Do we want them to live in a free New Zealand, or do we not? Is it our duty? We brought them into this world. Is it our duty to do what it damn well takes to make sure that they live as free as we did, or even better? Is that our duty? People, when you're in this movement, it's hard. You're facing a lot of slings and arrows. You've got to do a lot of work. You've got to take a lot of time away from your families and your hobbies and your sports. You've got to do that. But you meet the very best friends you're ever going to make. You meet the best friends in the freedom movement that you'll ever make in your lives. Because these are discerning, smart people who are loyal and brave. These are the people you can count on. When times get tougher, you'll be glad of these networks. If times get better, you can sit round the pub and just tell the war stories. Have parties. You can say, wow, it was pretty rough back then. We thought we might going to lose it, but look, we pulled through. So we're in a critical time in world history, in the whole world. We're in a critical time in New Zealand. On the negative side, the globalists are getting worse. The communist Chinese are getting more powerful. A lot of Western governments are capitulating. We're seeing mechanisms set up that will take our freedom away forever. On the positive side, grassroots movements are springing up all over the planet. Everywhere. You saw a big uprising in China not long ago. You saw another one in Iran. You imagine if that happened in 5 years, when we've freed New Zealand, we've freed Canada, we've freed Australia, we've freed America. Those people wouldn't have stopped. They would have kept going until they brought down the CCP. They would have kept going until they brought down the mullahs. I believe we are connected, folks. What we do reverberates around the world. What we do locally is heard everywhere. You stop 15-minute cities in Auckland or Christchurch, that'll be heard everywhere. You win some seats here and you actually hold the government to the fire, just squeeze them really, really hard. That will be seen all over the world, folks. That will encourage your brothers and sisters in Argentina and Australia and Britain and everywhere around the planet. We're at such a time. Look, if I thought we were living in a world that's just atoms colliding with atoms, it's just material forces, I'd think we're pretty much done. But I believe there's something bigger. I believe miracles happen. And miracles happen when people work really, really, really hard. When people really, really put commitment. The American Revolution inspires me. There was a bunch of farmers and shopkeepers with squirrel rifles up against the world's greatest military empire. 3% of Americans supported the revolution. 3% of them fought in it. 20% supported it, and the rest didn't give a damn. So it's not anything new that the majority of the work is done by a minority of the people. But we have right on our side. We're on the side of good. We're on the side of freedom. And we're working for our country and our kids. Is there any more noble way to spend your life, folks? Is there any more noble cause to commit your time and energy towards? Is there any? So I want to say this. I'll take questions in a minute. So I just want to say this. I'm so proud to be here. I'm so proud to see what is happening in New Zealand. It really stirs my heart. And I just want to say thank you so much for what you're all doing. God bless America. God bless America. God bless America. God bless New Zealand, and God bless every single one of you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.